Matt Lemming here. This is the first video slash blog post that I'm doing post-election. So we just had a local election in which ballot questions 6, 7, and 8 were on the ballot. To recap, this was a question to fund the building of a new fire headquarters, which is question 6. Question 7 was to put $3 million towards the Medford public school system to level fund it, and $500,000 to the Department of Public Works to let them hire a permanent road repair crew. And question 8 was to put an additional $4 million towards the Medford public school system to invest in things like arts and vocational programs and additional money for teacher salaries, basically things to keep it competitive and improve and invest in the future of the Medford public school system. So the results of the elections came in. Questions 7 and 8 passed, and question 6 failed. The margins were pretty narrow. So question 7 passed with, this is the unofficial tally. It's not the official certified tally, but with the unofficial tally, it was 14,847 for and 13,304 votes against. Question 8 passed with 14,660 for and 13,518 against. And question 6 failed with 13,458 for and 13,965 against. So the ballot questions 7 and 8 passed with about 52% of the vote, and question 6 failed about 49 to 51. So, obviously I would have liked to see question 6 pass. The fact that the leadership of the firefighter union came out against it was most certainly what killed it. I think that there is probably a corpus of about 1,000 voters or so who supported the ballot measures level funding the schools, but decided to go with the leadership of the fire union and kill the funding for the fire headquarters. So I'm not really sure what the future of that project will be. I think that the next debt exclusion that we'll need to see is going to be for the new high school. That's coming in the future, probably in the next couple of years. And that's really going to need to be the priority. It's a very expensive project. The Massachusetts School Building Authority will likely put a good chunk of funding for it, but the remainder will need to be paid for by the city. And the way that you do that is with a debt exclusion. So these results are pretty unusual, just in the sense that typically it's overrides that fail. I did a lot of combing through the data, combing through the previous override votes that have gone through different municipalities since 1980. They have about a 41% passage rate overall, and during presidential election years in the November general election, they have about a 35% passage rate. So this was pretty unusual, all things considered. It was really stacked against it, especially since this is Medford's first time having an override. Debt exclusions actually have closer to an 89% passage rate, and that's interesting. I don't actually know why that is. I think it's because when voters are looking at something on the ballot, like a building is something that you can physically imagine is going to be there, and debt exclusions are also temporary, so that's slightly more appealing. Typically, whereas with overrides, when you're talking about things like teacher salaries, staff salaries, operating budgets, it's less tangible. It's something people can't really see. We were getting a lot of people commenting saying, oh, you should be able to balance the budget. You should be able to work creatively with less, things like that. That's not really something that you can do after a certain point. If a budget's just shrinking and shrinking over time, especially when it's as small as Medford's, that's something that's really not feasible after a while. The override campaign, the team that was for the overrides passing really made this clear, and I think the messaging was very much like, our tax rates are extremely low, our operating budget is very small. After a certain point, if someone is starving, you can't just tell them to stop starving and then give them less food. You need to actually give them food in order for them to survive and get better, and that's something that that's really the situation that Medford was in. Obviously, the votes were the vote was closer than I think most of us were expecting. We didn't see, I don't think any pollster really was able to effectively account for, the sort of red wave that swept across the nation. Donald Trump was elected to a second term, and he won all of the swing states. And I think we were also seeing that kind of shift happen within the very local elections, which, like, I was going into it, I had a good feeling that these would pass. I was kind of thinking that it would be more like 60-40, just given what I was seeing, given what folks were telling me at the doors. The fact that it was closer to like 52-48 did make me a little bit nervous, but it's also, I think it's also just is really a testament to the strength of the organizing team. The fact that we were able to, the fact that there were so many parents and so many people who wanted to see an investment in their children's future, who are willing to put in so much of their time into this, and just really come up with a more positive message than what we were seeing otherwise. The talking about the opposition is a little bit tricky because I didn't want to do that so much during the campaign. Just kind of giving air to the opposition's platform is usually just not good practice. I feel like now that everything is passed and we know what the vote totals are, I have a little bit more leeway to do that. But it was something that we were dealing with pretty consistently. So, I think what the opposition was going for was just a very targeted misinformation campaign. And that ended up undercutting them in the long term because it worked with some of the population, like some of the electorate, but others just ended up realizing that they were being lied to very consistently. And I think there's a lot of smaller instances of this happening. For instance, their mailer said that it was a $37.5 million tax increase, which it is if you use crazy math. The actual increase would have been about $9.5 million a year. The $37.5 million number is not anything that actually exists in reality. There's also the whole free cash thing that they just kept repeating, which is basically they're saying that we don't actually have to have this tax increase. We could just pay for an override increase through our savings account, which is, again, that's not a thing. Like, you can't just perpetually take money from your savings account because then you just spend down your savings and then you're left with $0 in the bank, and that's just not a good way to run a city. And this was explained dozens and dozens of times throughout the campaign. We did it in city council meetings. We did it in, I did it in letters to the editor. But it was just something that they just kept repeating, which is, it's a messaging strategy. If you just keep repeating a simple lie, eventually people will believe it. It's propaganda. So I understood what they were going for, and I also think that there are legitimate reasons to oppose the override. If you're a senior on fixed income, that is definitely that's definitely a concern. The city council, this we're doing what we can to to help people in that situation. So we're passing the maximum exemptions we can. I'm working on a program to give a housing incentive for veterans with a nonprofit. But at a certain point, you just can't work with a budget that continuously shrinks due to inflation. It's just eventually every city will need an override, and Medford was one of the last to do it. So that's just the situation we're in. And the opposition campaign, like, I know something about the leadership of them just because I pay attention to this. I think they kind of tried to make it like an anonymous thing as much as possible. But I did I was kind of aware of some of the people who were involved in that. It's mainly a combination of former, like, old guard politicians and former political candidates who just really do not like to see a progressive majority on city council, and so they're just kind of this doing everything you possibly can to oppose that, because obviously they're going to try to run their own candidates, and they want to weaken the people who are currently in office and just kind of make a ruckus around that as much as possible. So that's obviously going on. And then other people that were also involved in the leadership of the opposition campaign were really just a couple of out-of-town developers and real estate agents who own literally millions of dollars in property. Like, I looked it up on I looked it up online. A lot of the people, like a few of the people that are listed as being on leadership of the override campaign, own literally millions of dollars in property. They just don't want to see it taxed. So there was lip service kind of being paid to some of the fixed income folk that are going to be affected by this, but the people that were designing the messaging, I don't think they honestly cared about that. I think that they're really just trying to find a pretense to oppose the people who are currently in office at all costs. So yeah, my opinions on that are a little bit complicated, because I do have I do understand that anytime you come up with a tax increase, it's not going to be kind of an ideal sort of trade-off. People are going to be affected by it, but on the other hand, long term, you just can't have a city budget that keeps shrinking, and you can't just lay off 40 teachers and allow cuts to keep happening to our educational system. That's not a way to run a city, and nobody else was actually proposing a clear solution to this that we didn't refute 2,400 times. And so yeah, I think that basically the messaging of the pro campaign was just a lot better. We were generally working a lot harder. We were more successful at fundraising. And the odds, just statistically, the odds are really stacked against this happening. Again, you had a huge red wave go across, coming across the country, and yeah, that generally means that when that happens, that there will be more people that are opposed to any tax increases happening. But I'm personally relieved that this happened, just because it means that we won't have to lay off a lot of teachers next year, and we actually will be able to see more investment in the public school system. So yeah, moving forward, what I also learned was that just running these local campaigns can be a very stressful thing. I was just putting a lot of my personal time into that. I hope that the next time that I have to do this, it won't be quite as much of an intensive process. I guess the first time we would ever try to pass these ballot measures, you're trying something new. It'll be difficult. But again, we are likely going to have a debt exclusion for the high school in the future. The people currently in office and who are working on coming up with the plans for that high school made that very clear. So yeah. But yeah, so other things happening. So, obviously, the red wave happened about something. I'd have to look at the exact number. I think something like 25% of Medford voted for Donald Trump. Massachusetts is like the second bluest state, only to Vermont, in the country. And just like every other, progressive politician, I've been thinking about that. So, I consider myself a progressive. I'm also probably more in the moderate category than a lot of other politicians. So I'm the secretary of the Medford Democratic City and Ward Committees as well. Longer term, so everybody's trying to come up with their own take on sort of the election. I think the pollsters were saying that it was 50-50, but what we actually saw was, again, Trump really take everything, like take most of the battleground states. I mean, I'm more convinced that this was just an effect of a very bad post-COVID economy that affected most incumbent administrations. So there's a YouTuber who I linked to in my blog post who talked about like the best and worst post-election takes, and I tended to agree with him. He came up with two post-election takes on what happened that I thought were reasonable. The first was just that pretty much every incumbent government globally lost re-election this past year. The UK saw the Labour Party oust the Tory government for the first time since Tony Blair. Meanwhile, every other incumbent government, whether or not they're left or right, has also been kind of following the same pattern. So I tend to take that view on things, which was just this was a bad time for anybody in office to be kind of holding the ball while inflation was as high as it was. I also think that given that, Trump's in office again, we're probably going to see a lot of progressive organizing happening. So I think there will be a heightened interest in that. From 2016 to 2020, we just saw a ton of that happening. A lot of people started to take an interest in local politics, got really involved in their community. And whenever you have someone who comes in, like whenever, your party is in office, you get pretty complacent. I think that the progressives on council did see this happening during our terms. I think that when you have progressives have 6 out of 7 seats, then you do tend to get a little bit. Then we have been seeing folks get a little bit complacent about it. I think that the sort of contention in the local elections that we just saw definitely mobilized a lot of people, because they saw like, okay, you got folks elected, you can't just kind of leave them there. You need to continue it, like show continuing support for the folks that you elect while they're trying to govern. So I think that it's, again, I'm a Democrat, so I don't really have that much of a positive outlook on where things are going to be going. But I do think that it will really get people to pay a lot more attention to local politics, and it will get people to really be encouraged to get involved, and kind of like not be that complacent. So yeah, that's my take on what's sort of been happening in Medford over the past couple of months, as well as nationally. I'm probably not able to offer as much insight on the national stuff as some other folks, but I am very proud of the fact that we were able to get these passed. I do, understand that it's a pretty slim margin, so I think that probably reaching out to different other folks in the community, especially those without as much computer access in different crowds than we have been engaging, would be wise for the future. Seniors especially tend to not look at their computers as much. They get more information by word of mouth. So really engaging with that community going forward will be pretty essential. But yeah, so that is my post-election take. Thank you all very much for your continuing support, and have a wonderful day.